Hello, this is DrPaulCottrell, and I'm going to be talking about Parah Adumah, Chapter 7 by Maimonides. The performance of work disqualifies water that was drawn for the ashes of the red heifer before it is sanctified, but it does not disqualify the sprinkling of the ashes. These rulings are stated in the oral tradition. What is implied? If one draws water for sanctification with the ashes and was involved with another activity while drawing it, carrying the water that was drawn or pouring it from one container to another, he disqualifies it. The performance of an activity disqualifies the water until the ashes are placed on it. If one places ashes on the water and sanctified it, causing it to be fit for sprinkling, the performance of another activity does not disqualify it. If one carries sanctified water from place to place or pours it from one container to another while being occupied with another activity, it is of no consequence. This also applies if one sprinkles it with one hand and performs an activity with another hand. That payment of a wage disqualifies the sanctification of the water and the sprinkling of it, but it does not disqualify the drawing of it. What is implied? When one takes a wage for sanctifying the water for the ashes of the red heifer for sprinkling it, the water is considered as the water of a cavern, and the ashes as ashes from a range, which are of no halachic significance. One may, however, take a wage for drawing the water or transporting it. One should sanctify it without charge, and the one who sprinkles it should sprinkle it without charge. If one sanctifying or sprinkling the water was old and unable to walk, and an impure person came and asked him to go with him to a distance place to sanctify such water at, as benefits an unemployed worker who had previously worked at that profession. Similarly, if he was a priest and because he would accompany him, he would contract an impurity that prevents him from partaking of teruma, he should feed him, give him beverages and oil to anoint himself during the time he travels with him to sanctify or sprinkle the water. If he causes him to cease working, he should pay him a wage as benefits an unemployed worker who had previously worked at that profession. The rationale is that all of these considerations are not wages. He is being paid for sanctifying or sprinkling the water, for he did not profit at all. He only took compensation for what he lost. When a person draws water with one hand and performs work from his other hand, the water is unacceptable. Similarly, if he drew water for himself and for another person, or he drew water for two people at the same time, both are unacceptable. For drawing water is considered as work. Thus, during each of the drawings of water, it is as if he performed another task at that time. And we have already stated that the performance of an activity disqualifies the drawing of water, whether one draws for himself or for others. When a person draws water for the ashes of the red heifer for others, even if he filled 1,000 barrels or after the other for 1,000 different people, they are all acceptable. Each person should take his water and sanctify it. The following rules apply if one drew water for himself, one barrel after another. If he intended to collect all the water in one container, cast the ashes upon it, and sanctify all at once, it is all acceptable, for it is all considered as one drawing of water. If, however, he intended to sanctify every barrel individually, they are all unacceptable except for the last one. The rationale is that the first becomes disqualified due to the work, the drawing of the second barrel that was performed before it was sanctified. Similarly, the second is disqualified for the drawing of the third. Thus, it is only the last which is acceptable. When five people fill 5 barrels with spring water to sanctify them for 5 different sanctifications. For example, they intended to cast the ashes on each one individually and then changed their minds and decided to mix them all together and sanctify them at once. Alternatively, they filled the barrels to sanctify them all in one container and then changed their minds and decided to sanctify each of the 5 independently. They are all acceptable because the person drawing the water did not become involved in drawing other water after. When by contrast, an individual fills 5 barrels to sanctify each of the 5 individually, only the last one is acceptable. If he fills the barrels to sanctify the water in one container and he changed his mind and sanctified each of the 5 individually, only the one that he sanctified first is acceptable. Similarly, if a person told a colleague, sanctify these for yourself, only the bucket that is sanctified first is acceptable. If, however, he told him, sanctify these for him, they are all acceptable because they were all filled to be sanctified in one container, even though he changed his mind and decided to sanctify each of the 5 individually. He himself did not perform the sanctification, someone else did. If a person seeks to draw water to sanctify it and other water for his own purpose, he should draw the water he desires for his own purpose first and tie the barrels and load them behind him. Afterwards, he fills the buckets he intended to use for the water for the ashes of the red heifer so that he will not be involved in any work after drawing it. He places it in front of him and proceeds. The following laws apply when 2 people were drawing water individually and one helped the other lift his water to load it on his back, or one removed a thorn from the other's hand or body when he was drawing the water. If they both drew the water to sanctify it in a single container, all of the water is acceptable. If each of them drew the water to sanctify it independently, the one who helped his colleague lift his water or remove the thorn disqualified his own water. When a person borrows a rope to draw water for the ashes of the red heifer, draws the water, takes the rope in his hand and the water on his shoulders, and meets the owner of the rope while he is on his way, the water remains acceptable even though he gives him the rope while he is walking. If he went out of his way to bring the rope to its owner, he disqualified the water. If someone who was drawing water for the ashes of the red heifer cast the rope he used to draw the water on the ground, and after he drew the water, gathered the rope in his hand, he disqualified the water. If while drawing the water he gathered the rope, winding it around his hand, the water is acceptable. When one was drawing water with a small jug and pouring the water into a larger barrel, and he put aside the larger barrel so that it would not break while he was drawing the water, or he turned it upside down to dry it so he could fill it, the water is acceptable. For these activities are performed for the sake of the drawing of the water. If, however, before sanctifying the water he had drawn, he set the barrel aside or dried it to transport the water he would sanctify, he disqualified the water because he performed a task that was not for the purpose of drawing the water. Similarly, the laws apply when one who was drawing water and pouring the water into a trough within a stone remove shards from the trough while filling it. If his intent was that the trough would hold more water, the water is acceptable, for this is considered as for the purpose of the drawing water. If this intent is that the shard would prevent the water from flowing out when he seeks to draw off the water with which he filled the trough, the water is unacceptable. The following rules apply when a person thinks of filling a bucket of water to drink and changes his mind and decides to use the water for the ashes of the red heifer. If he changed his mind before the bucket reached the water, he must pour the water out, but he does not have to dry out the bucket. If he changed his mind after the bucket reached the water, he must pour it out and he must dry it. Only afterwards may he fill it with water for the ashes of the red heifer. If he lowered the bucket towards the water with the intent of using the water to drink, and the rope broke away from his hand, if he changed his mind before the bucket reached the water, he must pour the water out, but he does not have to dry out the bucket. If he changed his mind while the bucket was still in the water and intended to use the water for the ashes of the red heifer, he must pour it out, but does not have to dry the bucket. When a person drew water to use the ashes of the red heifer, and after drawing it, thought to, let me re-say that. When a person drew water to use for the ashes of the red heifer, and after drawing it, thought to drink it, the water is disqualified from the time he inclined the container to drink from it, even though he did not drink from it at all. That concludes Chapter 7 of Parah Adumah. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and help support my work by donating. You can donate on the homepage through Stripe, PayPal, or Buy Me a Coffee. Also, please subscribe to all my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. You can also help support my work by being a paid member on my channel on Patreon. The link is in the description of this video. Also follow me on X and GETTR. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.